I said earlier in the intro that I was interested in the theme for today because it addresses my own life experience. I was really excited to hear what Lauren would have to say about it because it's my story too. And the word faith transition, that was new to me, but I much prefer that to loss of faith, not just because it is more accurate in my case, but because it is more positive and reflecting my own experience, that this journey as a whole has been a positive and a good one. My parents were already in the, quotes, mission field in India when I was born, so I started life in a conservative Christian bubble within a beautiful, complex, and religiously diverse culture. Mom and Dad were both teachers on a college campus, and they valued critical thinking. So it is not surprising that questions that were developing as I progressed through high school especially became big hurdles in college. New ideas and perspectives, both from my science courses and from my introduction to a historical critical analysis of scriptures that I wasn't aware of before, challenged what had been for me a stable worldview. Faith transitions can obviously be very different for different people, but my own was by and large smooth and slowly evolving with just a jolt here and there, now and then. It helped me that my wife and I were on parallel tracks going through that experience, traveling at roughly the same speeds to making those adjustments. We started off with really big doubts, together that is, but just sort of hung on to the community we grew up with because it is a way of life to be a Seventh-day Adventist. In fact, Charlotte says that growing up, the SDA church for her was her hometown. Her father was a minister. They moved every 5 years or so. And so to visit a new church was just like almost visiting relatives or something close by. And we could pop into around the world. We went on a biology trip together to Australia and in college, and new accents, new church. Didn't matter. It's it's visiting relatives almost. Although there were some pretty big, it felt mostly like home until it didn't. So that's the big point here, because although there were some big fractures going on, we were able to hold it together for a while. And what sort of pushed us beyond that stage was when our kids were starting to, not even grow up. Ruby was 3 years old. 3 years old. We're going to church together in grad school. Charlotte was in residency. I was in grad school. And out of the blue one day, we're in the car. She says to us, "Where's Jesus?" So I remember Charlotte and I looked at each other. I'm thinking, who's going to take this? And what are you going to say? So I pause. Charlotte says, "He's in our hearts." Like, wow, okay. This might work for a while. But it was only about 2 or 3 weeks later when we're at church and Ruby's RE teacher comes up to us and says, let's see, I got to get this right. "Ruby is so cute. We were talking in class about Jesus in heaven, and Ruby says, 'No, he's not. He's in our hearts.'" So that was the start of a transition. When we started to realize this wasn't going to work out long term. It took us a while before we ended up here. Well, in a Unitarian church, someone else for a little while, and then here. But the kids helped nudge us along. Unfortunately, they had to deal with some of that faith tug of war as well. It's impacted them. Hopefully they're on the journey still, right? Like many of us are. That last hurdle for me, though, was the hardest one. Letting close family, those who are already aware of our big questions, know that we were out, really. How can we explain to them that we're not rejecting them, our family, but just coming to honest terms with who we are now? Yes, our relationships with each other, our family, are getting tweaked as we adapt to the situation, but the core values that they taught us growing up are still intact. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. Not reinterpreting that. For those of you who know the scripture that comes from, we've had to reinterpret that, but the message for us is still the same.
So, my faith journey begins near Salt Lake City, the headquarters of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was born in Utah and raised in a devout Mormon family. We read scriptures together, we prayed before every meal, we attended church each Sunday. And then I remained active and followed the expected path. I went through all the major milestones. I served a 2-year mission, I married in the faith, and I began raising a family. But now I'm standing here giving a sermon at a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and it has been years since I have attended an LDS church service. My beliefs around concepts like God, scriptures, and prayer have radically changed. I seek out a wide range of spiritual practices, but I also hold those things lightly, and I engage in them just sometimes. My wife and children have also gone on journeys of their own. Now, around our dinner table, we share one thing you're grateful for, instead of a prayer asking a divine being to bless our food. And our children are able to explore their own unique viewpoints without any sense of needing to conform or adhere to a set of prescribed beliefs. So needless to say, things have changed. This transition, which has unfolded for about 8 years, has been one of the most difficult experiences of my life. My previous solid beliefs disintegrated. It felt like gripping a rock in my hand and watching it dissolve into sand, the grains spilling through my fingers, blowing away on the wind and lost, no matter how tightly I tried to cling to them. I was losing a place that used to feel like home. As a young child, I learned about the parable in the Bible of the wise man and the foolish man. In primary, the Sunday school program for children, we learned a song with matching actions that told the story. So we talked about the wise man built his house upon the rock. And we talked about the rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and floods came up, and that house on the rock stood still. I see some of you are like, yeah, oh, I know that too. Not just a Mormon thing. In contrast, the foolish man builds his house upon the sand. And when those same winds and rain and floods come, the house falls with a great crash and is washed away. So this was given as an illustration of the importance of building my whole life on the rock, on a belief in Jesus and the teachings of the LDS Church. So it's a simple story about stability, certainty, and getting it right. And I think for many of us, that's how belief, and belief broadly, not just religious belief, is given to us. It's something that we build and we live inside our beliefs, and they're on a clear foundation that we can define and explain. It has walls that define where we belong, a roof that shelters us from uncertainty, and a foundation that feels solid and unquestionable. Inside the house, things make sense. There are answers to big questions, a shared language, and a clear sense of identity. But also, a house doesn't just shelter, it separates. So there are people inside the house and people outside of the house. There are those who share the foundation and those who don't. A house can start to feel also like something we possess, and maybe even something that we have to defend. And for some people this works, until it doesn't, like Mark said. Navigating significant change in beliefs can be a complicated process that may involve feelings of surprise, bewilderment, uncertainty, grief, anger, sadness, joy, loneliness, relief, numbness. And this doesn't just occur in religious contexts. Think of the person who realizes that a marriage or a relationship no longer fits who they are, and they begin to question their notion of this is how love works. Think of a queer person coming out who has long known that the house of expected identity for sexual orientation or gender identity was never a welcoming or safe space. Think of someone who dedicated their life to a career path and then after 15 years realizing success didn't bring the sense of purpose they expected, or maybe even realizing they have ethical concerns about that career and then leaving that job to pivot to a completely new path. Again and again, in different ways, we may find ourselves leaving houses we once believed we would live in forever. But I want to pause here and suggest that for some people, the metaphor of exiting a house may not be useful for describing and reflecting on a change in belief. So for one thing, it's very binary: inside, outside, believer, non-believer, before and after. Another problem is also how it's connected to this idea of possession, of owning something. So in growing up in the LDS faith, we use the word testimony to refer to one's sort of collection of religious beliefs. And so we would talk about gaining a testimony, having a testimony, and then people who fell away or left the church, we would say they lost their testimony. They don't have it anymore. It feels very much like this possession, right? So initially, as I began to wrestle with questions and deconstruct some of my religious beliefs, I truly felt like I had lost part of me. As I stopped attending LDS church services, I felt like I was losing a home. I was so focused on what I was no longer doing, what I was changing, what I was leaving behind, that I struggled to feel a sense that I was moving towards something. So it's a little bit like trying to drive forward, but constantly looking in your rearview mirror, checking to see how far away you are from where you started. So I very clearly remember the first Sunday that I decided to come to a church service here at the UUCP. I decided to come by myself and check it out. On that summer Sunday morning, I was talking to my wife Anne as I was getting dressed and ready to drive over here to Moscow. So for LDS church services, I almost always wore a white shirt and tie. I guessed that the UU dress code might be a bit more casual. A lot of churches are more casual than the LDS church. So I still wore a white button-up shirt, but I rolled up the sleeves and opted for no tie. I find it humorous now, but I remember telling Anne about my mixed emotions, my curiosity, but also my feelings of guilt, my difficulty in shaking the sense that somehow, like attending a single UU church service as a visitor was a symbol of turning my back and closing the door on my Mormon upbringing. And there's that pesky house metaphor again, right? And so like just leaving the house and driving to come over here, I had this feeling of like it was a symbol of this thing that I was doing, that I was leaving. Once I arrived, I encountered unfamiliar but pleasant elements of the worship service. I loved the yellow walls and the sky blue ceiling and the large expansive paintings. They played a John Denver song, Sunshine on My Shoulders. I had never considered John Denver to be church music before. But I loved it. I loved thinking about it in a spiritual context. And I was sitting there and I was like, I'm having spiritual insights as I'm like listening to this and thinking about what sunshine is a symbol of, what it means. Following the service, Martha Schmidt, she came up to me and introduced herself, and she also encouraged me to come back, because this was during the summer when Elizabeth was away for a month, and she said, definitely come back when Elizabeth is here. Like, you really want to hear her services. And no one, not Martha, not John Denver, not even the paintings hanging at the front of the sanctuary, asked me to adhere to a certain set of beliefs or to build on a particular foundation. And then in one of my early conversations with Elizabeth, she expressed delight that I was curious about the UUCP, and she encouraged me to take what resonated with me and be part of the community as long as it felt helpful. And she noted, If my spiritual path took me elsewhere at some point, she would be equally delighted, because it would mean I'm following what feels right for me and going where my inquiry and intuition tells me I needed to be. I was stunned, because that is not similar to how I grew up. I was just like, someone saying, sure, come be part of our group, and then if you don't, I love that for you, love that journey for you. So the notion of journey really spoke to me. So what if I hadn't lost anything? What if I didn't see it as leaving something behind, but instead of just seeing it as the next steps of a journey I had already been on? So let's consider this metaphor. What if belief transition is not a doorway we step through once, but a path we walk over time, a landscape that we move through? And then as we travel, we cross different terrains, we cross into different climates. And you might start to notice some small changes. The temperature changes, some flowers or fruit are new, perhaps there are more hills, maybe it rains more. I would invite you to think about a transition in your own life, perhaps sudden or perhaps a long, gradual shift. Was this a change in spirituality, a romantic relationship, in your career, the way you saw and labeled your identities, philosophical or political beliefs? And how could you tell that you had crossed into a new climate? What looked or felt different? And I also find it interesting to think what looked or felt the same, what stayed consistent. As the climate changes, your needs may change, and you might see the things you carry with you in a different way. Tools that may have been necessary for survival at one point may no longer be helpful. So in my 20s, my Mormon certainty felt like a thick, warm coat. I knew where I came from, why I was here, and where I was going. I could draw God's plan as a diagram on a whiteboard. Totally easy, I could still do it. That clarity and conviction brought me so much comfort, and hearing others share their certainty warmed my heart as well. But now that same certainty, it makes me sweat. I feel like I'm wearing a ski parka in Arizona. It no longer serves the purpose that it once did. So I want to offer a few questions. What are you carrying on your journey right now? What beliefs, practices, or assumptions have been part of your gear, your tools? And which of those still serve you in the climate that you are in right now? And which ones feel heavy or clunky or maybe no longer useful? Are there things you might loosen, modify, or set down for a while? And what might you be ready to pick up? Is there a new way of seeing, a new way of practicing, or maybe even just a new question you're curious about? Something you might try on, not as a permanent commitment, but just as an experiment. And we don't have to do this alone. That's one of the things I've come to appreciate deeply about this community. We are not a house where everyone is trying to build using the same blueprint. We're something more like a group of fellow travelers. I like to think of us as sort of a group of friendly hikers who meet each other on overlapping branches of the trail. We may even walk together for a while, sharing stories and trail mix or granola bars. Some of us like to hike quickly. Some of us like to take a little more slowly. Some of us might be pausing, resting, maybe taking care of a wound, like a blister or a sore ankle, or maybe watching the clouds or writing a poem. We didn't all start in the same place, and we are not all headed to the same destination. But for this stretch of the journey, we are here together. So, if you are someone who is in the middle of a transition, if things that once felt solid now feel uncertain, if you feel like you are carrying something that no longer fits, you're not broken, you are not lost. You are adapting. You're learning the terrain. And if you are someone who feels relatively steady in your beliefs, maybe you've already gone through a significant transition, then perhaps your role right now for this stretch of the trail is to walk with compassion, to make space, to listen, and to trust that others are navigating their own journeys just as you are. Because maybe that's what belief becomes in the end. It's not a house that we defend, not a set of answers that we hold to so tightly that we cling to, but a way of walking, a willingness to keep going, to keep listening, and to keep becoming together for a time.